one of the top football players. Um, and for me, I'm Jason. I said I'm going to work hard as possible. I look at it like this, when most of us were.
This is Sports Spectrum, bringing Jesus into the sports conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
He is Greg Ellis. Hey, Greg, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you. Obviously, being a football fan, a lot of people are going to recognize your name as a former Dallas Cowboys defensive end / linebacker, depending on what system you're playing in.
There you go.
First off, congrats on your role with Southwestern Assemblies of God University. Tell us about the school, the team, and why this was the right yes for you to say, I'm going to be the head coach of this football team.
When I was talking to Dr. Bridges, the president, and Dr. God and the AD, about this opportunity, I kept using this term, is that it's a breath of fresh air for me, because obviously, I love football, and most people know about me. I enjoy helping people, and to be able, and I enjoy young people, and to be able to combine all of that with my personal faith, it's literally a breath of fresh air for me, because you can be yourself in your faith, you know what I mean, and still enjoy doing what you enjoy doing, which is, being involved with football. So it's the best of both worlds for me.
Well, it becomes more of a discipleship than just a coaching thing, right? Like, hey, we want to win football games, but like you mentioned, being able to incorporate your faith, this becomes something bigger than just football.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The breath of fresh air is that everything I do for is, coaching and working with young people, I always looked at it as a discipleship, but you have to be so careful about how you approach that. But now, at an institution that understands the importance of everyone's faith, right? It's more comfortable, because you don't have to walk around saying, well, excuse me for saying this, but pardon me for saying that. You can just be yourself in your walk with Christ and freely express that to a group of young people.
When did coaching become something you started to think about? Does that go all the way back to when you were playing, when you had this inkling that you might be a coach someday?
It was other coaches, Bill Parcells, Mike Zimmerman, who's just been released from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Those guys told me, and several other coaches, they always told me that, you will make a good coach. You have to coach. You have to coach. I told them at the time, I said, I love football and would love to coach. But with my family, my wife and kids, especially our kids being so young, I felt and knew, I'm guilty of being a workaholic. So probably wouldn't be good for me to be coaching when they were that young. But now they're older. And so the opportunity for me to get involved with coaching full time is greater now than it was, a couple of years ago.
So what kind of coaching style do you have? Is it Mike Zimmer? Is it Bill Parcells? Heck, even Wade Phillips, who you played on and had some success in that 2007 year. Where's your
Correct.
coaching style, fall into that fray?
And it's interesting that you asked that question, because it certainly is a combination of a lot of people, right? Competition goes back to my high school basketball coach, Phil Spence. We had some very competitive practices, and I think the guys competing in practice push each other to a higher level, and perfecting their craft, if you would. Mac Brown, he and Bill Parcells' approach are actually more similar than people realize, because both of those guys concentrated on coaching the coaches, if you would. And so they would pour a lot of time into the position coaches, leading with the coordinators, of course, and place, the responsibility to execute on those position coaches. And in turn, those position coaches, of course, will push and get the best they can possibly get out of the actual football players. And so I'm going to pull on that a whole lot. And Mike Zimmerman, just his attention to detail is like no other. And so I'm going to pull on that a lot. So those four kind of pulls together to create what we pray is a successful Greg Ellis coaching, run, if you would.
So I've been fortunate to, when I worked at ESPN and I was colleagues with Darren Woodson, he would tell Bill Parcells stories all the time. In fact, I even got to spend some time working with Bill Parcells a little bit at ESPN when I was there. We've had on Chris Canty, we've had on Marcus Spears, a couple of your former teammates, particularly from that 06 team and that 05 team. And then they all had their own stories, their own unique, insight. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, maybe your favorite Parcells story or one that stands out that got you chuckling right now when I ask that.
Yeah, because some of them we can't repeat on air.
Especially a family show like this one, Greg.
I remember it's not a long dragged out story. And it's definitely PG for us. It's real short, but it Bill, the training room. I mean, he had the training room, man, so cold that you could hang meat in there. It was freezing. When he got there, he took all the TVs out of the training room. And so it was no, let's go to the training room and hang out and watch TV kind of deal anymore. It was strictly like, if you're in this training room, it's your last resort place for you to go. You're really hurt if you're in this training room. And so that was some of the things he implemented. But one day, he hit that usual coach's stride and, he gets mad because practice isn't going right. And so he cancels practice and, that kind of deal that a lot of coaches do sometimes. And the funniest thing, we go into the locker room, he yelling at the trainer, close the training room doors, close the training room doors. And it's like, well, guys, have to get ice and stuff like that. And so he told the trainers, put ices in bags and just throw the ice out there and close the doors. And so I'm like, man, he actually just, closed the training room and threw ice outside. If you wanted bags of ice, you had to get it and put it on your own injury or whatever you had. But that was Bill, you know what I mean? Everybody has a Bill story, and Bill was a big psychological guy that obviously has gotten a lot of results over the years, but he understood the importance of the psychological game, if you would. And so it worked for him. And so obviously, I'm obviously going to implement some of that practice with us as well. But nowadays in age, I probably can't close the training room door.
I was going to say, you can't get away with that today, Greg Ellis.
No. You won't be able to do that. Exactly.
That's right. Mm-hmm. He is Greg Ellis, and he's joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Greg, we're the intersection of sports and faith. A lot about what we talked about as you as a coach with your new role with Southwestern Assemblies of God stems from your faith, your deep-rooted faith in Christ. Why don't you take us through sort of your journey a little bit to the Lord and its importance of having Christ in your life?
I tell people, my journey is a little different, and I know a lot of people may say that, but for me, my relationship with Christ goes back, man, to when I was little, right? Now, I didn't officially get saved, and was led through the sinner's prayer until I was in 11th grade. But my relationship, I grew up, and most of my friends are surprised that I'm not a full-fledged ordained minister right now. That's how I was as a kid. I wasn't perfect as a kid, but I always, for some reason, I guess it was, God obviously had his hand on me, that I understood the importance of that personal relationship with Christ. And, that's the way I lived my life. The times my parents, they would take us to church, but the times that they missed Sundays, when I got old enough, I would drive myself to church, it just always, to me, I recognize the importance. And for lack of better terms, even as a little kid, it felt right worshiping and learning about God. It just felt right, and it felt, empty if I didn't. Now, I know that may be a little different for a lot of people, but that was my relationship with God and with Jesus. Um, and that, that's pretty much what it was. Um, I did a I'm Second video. I was one of the first people
Yeah.
to be blessed to be a part of I'm Second. And I told them, I was like, man, I don't have that glamorous testimony. Like I was doing a whole bunch of bad stuff and, had this Saul moment and the bright lights came on and things like that. But for me, I tell them, it's like my relationship with Christ has been so long. It's like it since I was here on this earth to start remembering stuff, it just always felt right to me. So when I told him on the I'm Second video is that it's not a part of my life, it is my life. It impacts every area of my life. Again, doesn't mean I'm perfect, doesn't mean I have crossed every T and dotted every I, doesn't mean I've never got upset. But I can honestly say that every area of my life is led by Christ. And as the bracelet says, what would Jesus do? It really, I cannot live my life and not interested in living my life without consulting God on every aspect of my life. And again, I know that people may say, well, that sounds really goody two shoes. But honestly, it's the truth. If you can chase back to kids who I grew up with, they'll tell you the same thing. They would, like I said, they're probably surprised. A lot of them, even some of the grown-ups that knew me when I was a kid, they just not surprised. They are surprised that I'm not, an ordained minister. But I look at it is that for me, my ministry is not necessarily directly in the pulpit, but it's in so many other areas of my life. And football is obviously one of those areas that God has entrusted me with groups of young people to minister to them for several hours a day. And I am so ecstatic to have that opportunity and humble with that responsibility to.
I think I lost your audio there. Can you finish?
Yeah. You know what? That's the bad things about doing these on the phone. I probably should have did it on my iPad because my phone started ringing and then it popped up. It says muted. So it mutes me from talking to you when the phone rings. But
it's fine. Well, let me do this. I'm going to pick it up. You just finish up with what you were saying about, be surprised that you weren't an ordained minister, and then just finish that up, and then I'll pick it up and I can edit that out.
Okay. Yeah. So people are just, really surprised that I'm not an ordained minister because them seeing me as a child, it was always, I was, walking around with the Bible. And I remember, your parents, they go to work and they leave you and your siblings at home. And they would tell us, hey, don't let anybody in the house. My friends would come to the house and they would say, well, Greg, can we come in? And I would say, man, no, my mom, dad, so I can't let anybody in. And they would say, well, they're not going to know. But I was going to know. And, that conviction, even at an early age, led me to, hey, man, you can't come in here. That's what they said. Now, again, don't take that and think that I did everything right.
Right.
Because I did get caught with my hand in the cookie jar a couple of times. But, it just was always something to me, Jason, that felt right and felt, complete to have that relationship with Christ.
As you got some accolades, right? Certainly being an All-American, being a first-round pick, going to Dallas. I mean, that team alone, and there was enough controversy around that 98 draft when you were selected there, but then there's this pressure, right, to achieve, and you come into this sort of latter stages of this Cowboy dynasty with Aikman and Emmett and Michael and Deion and Darren Woodson. All those guys are still there when you get there. What was that like as a young person, as a follower of Christ, being a young professional athlete? And maybe it didn't affect you, but I wonder what that was like, just acclimating yourself, because you want to do well and achieve and have as much success as you can. And yet you don't want to compromise your faith for anything.
You're exactly right. Compromising my faith was never an option for me. I was prepared to live that, what Lone Ranger life, if you would, if that's what it came down to. And thank God it never fully came down to it, right?
Yeah.
But compromising my faith, man, was nothing that ever crossed my mind. Um, because I've seen and experienced just so many situations where I see God intervene. So that never crossed my mind. Um, it it was a lot of pressure because when you're a first round pick, a lot of expectations is placed upon you to come in right away and play and start and be one of the top football players. Um, and for me, I'm Jason. I said I'm going to work hard as possible. I look at it like this. When most of us were playing little league football, we probably stood out. Um, but then when you go on to middle school, you're kind of at the bottom again, and you have to work your way back up to become, amongst the best. And you figure that out. You're blessed with that success. And you go to high school, and you're like, okay, I'm back at the bottom. I have to, figure this out. And you're blessed to do that. Now you get to go to college and do it all over again. You're at the bottom and work and blessed to get back up to the top. Then you're like, okay, I just got drafted, even though I'm a first round draft pick. But, all of these guys are good football players that you're going against now. So you got to figure out how to work and get back up to the top echelon of those at the top again. And so that's how I looked at it. And in the process of working to get back up to the top where my name is being talked about amongst the best, man, I just thrust myself into it, right? I did all the extra stuff. I believe in, burning the midnight oil, if you would. And I just, applied myself with everything I could apply myself with. One of my base principles is, do it unto the Lord. And so I live my life like that, man. People will see me doing things and it's like, nobody's watching you. And I just say, well, Christ is watching, God is watching. So I do everything unto God. And just because eyes aren't on you, you still owe it to yourself to be amongst the best. In order to do that, in my opinion, if you do everything unto God, and if you truly do it the way he wants us to do it, it leads you to doing it to your best ability. And if you're practicing and lifting weights and running and studying film to your best ability, you can't help but to improve. And that's, concrete, what you can hang your hat on.
Yeah.
I don't like stuff I can't hang my hat on. I like concrete, factual evidence, this can back this up kind of stuff. And it works. And doing it that way has worked for me. And I challenge people to know that, hey, if you do it that way, you do it unto God, it's going to force you to do your best all the time. And then it will elevate your performance, whatever you're performing in, it will elevate that if you follow that basic principle of doing it unto God.
You came in, as I mentioned, in 98, high expectations, a first round draft pick, and those veterans that were there, right? The Aikmans, the Emmets, the Michael Irvins. And then you have this transitional period with Dallas when those guys start to kind of exit out and they're starting to rebuild, and Bill Parcells comes in, and then, I call them the Tony Romo years, right? When Romo becomes quarterback and he starts to take over, your role must have shifted, I would imagine, from this young guy to this veteran, right? So I'm wondering, from a spiritual perspective, who are some of the guys that were pouring into you and that you were able to pour into throughout your career to keep your faith growing? Because like you said, you can try to be a lone ranger, but I don't think Christ built us to be alone. Like, we need people in our lives. So who are some of those guys from those teams? And maybe it was a chaplain or somebody that was able to encourage you and kind of help you along in your 11 years that you were in Dallas.
Man, you know what? And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason. A guy named John Welber. John, I don't know if you never heard of John. John was our team chaplain. Okay. John goes all the way back to
Tom Landry.
Tom Landry. Yeah, there you go. All the way back to Tom Landry. Excuse me, Dallas Cowboys fans. I just had a kind of a brain fart. Tom Landry is a great man.
They'll forgive you. Don't worry.
I deserve a whooping for forgetting his name, but I just had a brain fart. But he was the chaplain going all the way back to Tom Landry. And John, he passed shortly after I left the Cowboys. No, I'm sorry. I may have been still with the Cowboys, but it was in my latter years, obviously. And the funeral home that did his service was Blue Bonnet Funeral Home. They're, big funeral home and all that. They did Byron Nelson's funeral as well. And I'll tell you this, Jason, they said the Blue Bonnet people at the funeral home said that John Welber has had the most attended funeral service than anybody in the history of their funeral home.
Wow.
And so as you asked me that question, a guy that poured into me was John Welber. And I actually was honored to speak at his funeral. And the thing that stood out to me was the number of people that came to his funeral. The night before the funeral, well, some people call it the wake or whatever you want to call it, but the night before the funeral, that service, so they had his wife positioned in a room, right? And so everybody was lined up that wanted to pay their respects to her. You would line up and, shake her hand and say whatever you want to say to her. The line was so long that the funeral home provider people said they went in there with her. And I was standing in there beside her. They said, Miss Weber, these people are standing here and they want to have an opportunity to shake your hand and wish their condolences to you because John impacted their life. But the line is out the door, wrapped around the building. There was be no way that they're going to make it through here. Do you mind getting up, walking? So her and myself, we walked so she can shake those people's hands. And I'll tell you this, Jason, out of all the people in my life, and not just with football, I mean, in my life that I've met, he is one of the top. He and my Uncle Larry are one of the top people that I say that is an example of Christ. And I said it about John because when you look at Jesus Christ's life, he only had 12 people that really rode with him, right? That was really his boys, his disciples. But look at the impact that one Jesus had on the whole world, right? Mm-hmm. And he never traveled really far. And that's John Welber, in my opinion. John didn't travel really far. He wasn't world renowned, but the people that he impacted in his small circle literally went around the world. And his funeral services was a good indication of the thousands of lives that he impacted. That's what Christ wants from us, right? It's not about the bells and whistles. It's how many lives are you truly impacting for Christ? And he did it in such a humble way. He was our team chaplain, but after the game, so he traveled with us. But after the games, it was nothing to see him in the locker room, picking up jock straps, picking up socks, doing the grunt, dirty work that people wouldn't want to do. And this man didn't have to do it. It was the equipment jobs people to do it. But here he was in there serving. And that's what he did. And so that person for me wasn't necessarily a player. It was John Welber.
Wow. Isn't that wonderful to hear? And I'm sure there were players too that, you had an impact on, especially in your later years, right? Where you become that veteran and that mentor, but there's always that one or two. And isn't that the key, I think, to just discipleship is having a Paul to your Timothy, having somebody above you that's a little more advanced, that's a little further along, that can just pour into you?
Oh yeah. That's the ideal situation. It is. You know what I mean? And sometimes you don't always have it in that. I would call, I don't want to say immediate circle, but that obvious circle that you may want it to be in. And so, like for me, I didn't necessarily have players to play that role in my life, but God did have a ram in the bush for me, and that was John Welber, who wasn't a football player, but he was certainly around us as football players a bunch, all the time. And so he served that role for me during those days. I mean, there were some good, strong Christian guys on the team as well. one guy named Kenyon Coleman. He came later in while I was with the Cowboys. He's a strong Christian man himself.
Yeah.
And some of those guys that like Emmett, those guys, they're Christian people as well. So yeah, so it was good. I would say this: a lot of those guys, sometimes people see things in you that you don't see yourself. And as a young player, they vote. I was my second year there, and they voted me to be the team player rep. And I was like, are you kidding me? Why would you want me to be the player rep? All of you Hall of Fame football players in here, and you want me to be the player rep.
Yeah.
But that's what they did. And so I was humbled by that. But so sometimes people see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And I think a lot of those guys that I was blessed to play with, that's what they saw in me. But there was some tremendous, like you said, Darren Woodson, Leon Lett, some tremendous guys, man, that I was really blessed to play with, that I wouldn't trade for the world. The experiences, the life lessons that I learned from those guys.
What's your favorite moment on the field from your playing days?
Oh, wow. Favorite moments. Okay. My favorite, man,
it may not be your best moment, but it might be your favorite moment, right?
It's a lot of them. One short one, man, and this is bad and good. We're playing Philadelphia. I broke my leg playing against chasing Donovan McNabb, and we're chasing him. And, it's a pile that accumulates on the sideline. And one of our guys, a guy named Alonzo Spellman, he's diving in to get it on the tackle. And I'm jumping out of the way because, he's on the ground. And as soon as I land on my left leg, Alonzo Spellman, 320 pounds, came and hit my leg, and it snapped it like a broomstick. Now, the worst part of that, Jason, I start to hyperventilate. I literally thought I was going to die because I lost my breath when I looked down at my leg. And true story, man, Deion Sanders came over, and I remember him saying, boy, you better keep your mind off that leg. And he prayed for me. And the honest God truth, man, I felt so relieved because I was actually able to breathe. So him praying for me, God allowed that prayer, a healing prayer, to allow me to breathe because I never got hurt like that before. And so I was literally hyperventilating. And I was like, I don't know if the trainers know that feel like I'm about to die because I literally can't breathe. And he prayed for me, and I literally caught my breath and was able to breathe. And so that was some instant relief. Now, one of the most probably funny memories was Troy Aikman. And so we're playing, I think, Arizona. It wasn't a playoff game, but we was playing Arizona at the old stadium. And so they're driving. They're probably on the 2-yard line, and they're about to score, right, going in. And so we tackle them. The ball is fumbled. I see the ball. I pick the ball up, and I'm really going to just lay on the ball. Darren Woodson grabs me by the elbow. He's pulling me up. I'm like, get up, get up, get up. Nobody touched you. And so I get up and start, running down the field. Now, Jason, I see 98 yards of nothing but green grass. I'm a defensive lineman. And I'm like, Lord, I have to run with this football. Right. And I don't think nobody's going to catch me because Arizona was late realizing that it was a fumble. And you can go find that play. And so anyway, thank God I make it to the end zone, stumble in the end zone, and everybody's congratulating me. And then Troy Aikman comes up. Now, this is my second year, so I'm still a really young player. Troy comes up and he said, Greg, hey, you better enjoy it because it'll probably never happen for you again in your whole NFL career, right?
Yeah.
And he's right. As a defensive lineman, you're not going to get a long touchdown like that. So the very next game, we're playing Atlanta Falcons. And I forgot who the quarterback was, but he throws a screen pass. And, dude, he throws it right to me. And so I catch the ball, and I'm like, okay, I've been here before. I know what to do. So I'm off and running, and that was 87 yards touchdown. Now, this time I'm tired, right? But everybody's congratulating me. But I go find Troy Aikman, and I tap him, and I said, hey, man, I thought you said it never happened again. And so that was my funny thing. Now here's the God moment in that, and I don't know what it all meant But my football number in the pros was 98, and that was a 98-yard touchdown return. My college number was 87. So the very next week, I get an 87-yard touchdown run. So I don't know what God was telling me at that moment, but we're still living to figure that one out.
The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mr. Ellis.
There you go. There you go.
All right. My last question for you, and thanks so much for your time. You've been generous. We asked this to all of our guests. It's a little deep of a question when you think about it, but what is God showing you and teaching you today, Greg Ellis, where he's brought you to in this new coaching position at Southwestern Assemblies of God University? What is the great lesson that the Lord is teaching you right now?
Man, to trust people, rely on your resources. I'm a huge do-it-yourselfer, but I'm learning here at this point and moment in my life that, a lot of times I hear people preach this, and I won't get it right, but it's something a roundabout way that, if you can fulfill everything in your vision, then your vision isn't big enough. It's not what God wants for you to do. It's not the only thing God wants for you to do. And so I can see that I'm at that moment in my life, and I'm really starting to realize that, okay, you have to allow people to do their part. It's not up to you to run the whole show. And I never did it for attention, to put all, attention on me, but it was just, if I felt like it wanted to be done right, I had to do it myself. And Bill Parcells is like that a lot. And he would tell me that. He was like, Greg, you don't have to win the game by yourself. So you have to rely on and I don't know why he even saw that in me, to be honest with you. And It wasn't from a selfish, like, hey, call all the plays and let me make all the plays. It wasn't from that point of view, but it was from the point of view of, and maybe he saw it in me because I would be tired in games and just willing to stay out there. And I really feel like I can't take another step because it's like, hey, I feel like I got to be out here to help us. But he would always tell me, Greg, you just know that you can't do it by yourself, and you don't have to do it by yourself. You're a good football player, but still, it's not, the responsibility doesn't stop with you to whether we win or lose this football game. And the same thing in coaching, Jason, is that it doesn't start or stop with me, whether we win, lose, or how our guys perform. It's a group effort, right? And so I guess that supports kind of what Bill and Mac Brown does, is pour into the coaches. They will be able to pour more into 140-something football players than I can, because it's nearly impossible for me to spend as much time with those players that the position coaches will spend with them, right? So the more, it's like Jesus, right? He spent time pouring himself into those disciples. And when he left, those disciples took the ministry to that next level. But if he would have spread himself too thin and trying to touch thousands of people and pouring himself, 100% of himself into those thousands of people, you wouldn't have had not one person that would have really got the gospel to the point that they were willing to lay down their life for the gospel. But those 12 that he poured into, they got it. And even Judas, the message in his life still served a purpose to propel the gospel and to elevate Jesus. So that's what I'm learning now, is to pour myself into my disciples. And those are my position coaches. And they can duplicate Greg Ellis, what my philosophy is to our football players.
Yeah, that's really good. He is Greg Ellis, a 1997 All-American with North Carolina, 2007 NFL Comeback Player of the Year, and a Pro Bowler, and a long, illustrious career with the Dallas Cowboys. Greg, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us on the show, and hopefully we'll do it again soon and talk some more.
Okay, thanks for having me, Jason.
Thanks so much for watching today on Sports Spectrum. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos. And if you want more stories on sports and faith, check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.